Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Germany's arming of Ukraine shows Berlin's direct involvement in the war. He also called German plans to build the strongest army in Europe worrying, citing the world wars.
The direct involvement in the Ukraine war is already clear. Germany is going downhill to its collapse, just like it was a couple of times in the last century. I hope that responsible politicians in this country will make the right conclusion and stop the madness.
Jackson Janes is a senior fellow at the German Marshall Fund. Thank you very much for being on DW. How carefully would you say Germany is treading here in its backing of Ukraine?
I think it is treading carefully, but it's also taking initiatives to get the point across, not only to Zelensky, but also to Putin, that they're willing to start a process and continue it down the line for an unlimited period of time to give Ukraine a chance to fight back in a way that they don't have now. So I think he's using this opportunity to send a message, and he's carefully thinking about also his upcoming trip to Washington in that context.
But building their own long-range missiles, that's something that's going to take time, like so much German military support, from Leopard tanks to Taurus missiles, which still haven't been really talked about.
No, I think they're going to hold that card out for a moment, but they're going to basically tell Ukraine, if you build it, you can use it. And I think that's the important message, as I said, not just for Ukraine, but also for Russia.
OK. Again, how worried should Berlin be about Moscow's statements? Would there be consequences?
We've been hearing about those kinds of challenges ever since you guys sent 5,000 helmets to Ukraine. This is fear-mongering on their part. And for them to say, as Lavrov just did, stop the madness, they're in a position to stop it tomorrow, but they're not going to do that.
And Merz sounds more assertive than his predecessor. But will he and can he be?
I think he has to be. I think the expectations are huge in terms of not only Germany taking up a role here, but also making sure that he's got in Europe the partners that they need to send a collegial message, but a strong message, not only to Russia, but I also think, again, to come back to the fact that perhaps Mr. Merz is going to Washington next week or the week after, to say the same thing to Trump. And this is important, and he's a cardinal player right now. And I think stepping up to a long sought-after question, where is Germany's leadership? He's now got that in his role.
So a sign of Europe taking a more strategic responsibility with Germany at the helm. Tell me about Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who's invited Ukraine for talks in Istanbul next week. How serious do you think those talks will be?
I think it's very difficult to know. It depends on who comes and who gets together with whom. Obviously, the last one didn't work out very well. I think the seriousness that it will take was the way that actually Chancellor Merz put it. I'll believe it when he's sitting at the table. I think we have to wait and see actually who shows up.
The other thing is that Trump's expressed disappointment with Putin dragging his feet. But do you see him actually taking a harder line with Putin?
President Trump, is that who you mean?
What was that, sorry?
You were asking about President Trump?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's probably trying to figure out a way to say that he still has influence with a man who's been playing him for the last several months. And I think that he's looking for a way out of that situation. But what he will do if he decides that there is going to be a continual playing of him in Moscow, you don't know what he'll do, but it may not be what he's saying right now. It's very difficult to predict President Trump, but I think he's getting agitated by the fact that he's looking like he's weak and he hates that image.
Yeah. Jackson Janes, great talking to you from the German Marshall Fund.
Thank you.
So for more on Russia's response, we can turn to Konstantin Eggert, DW's Russia analyst. Konstantin, Moscow obviously not happy with Germany's move today. How far do you think Russia will go in its response?
Well, Terry, to quote the old Elton John song, I've seen that movie too. We've seen it before. There were red lines in 2022, 23. There was there were accusations of Western involvement dating back to the beginning, pretty much, of this full-scale invasion. So nothing much will change. Actually, I do think that this is, for the first time in quite a long time, that Moscow feels vulnerable. Moscow feels that this could significantly flip the situation on the battlefield. So what I think is going to be the response, well, we've heard it today. Announcements of the new round of talks in Istanbul. I think that, to me, is very much, and of course, what I want to say is that the Russians knew that Zelensky is not coming to Berlin just to, chat with Merz. They expected some decision, and I think that this is an attempt to show that, the West is warmongering while we are talking peace, and this, to me, is rather a sign of weakness.
You think this will bring the Russians to the negotiating table rather than escalate the situation? I mean, Russia, the question is whether it now sees Germany, of course, itself a NATO member, as a target in the face of Friedrich Merz's more assertive policy.
Well, what I think they're going to do, they're going to try and really come to Istanbul to show, first and foremost of all, to the Americans that they are intent on some kind of conversation, negotiation, call it whatever you want. But I'm also certain they will continue to strike at Ukraine, mostly civilian targets that we've seen recently, in order to show that Ukraine has to bow to Russia's demands, that Russia is not afraid. So this is, by the way, very classic sort of Putin, trying to hide fear, but at the same time opening, or leaving at least a bit of maneuvering space, a bit of flexibility.
And while we're speaking of NATO, President Zelensky very much wants to be in NATO's upcoming summit. He's calling his absence there a victory for Putin. But I'm curious how an invitation for the Ukrainian president would be seen in Moscow if he were to get one.
Well, I think it's not the first time that Zelensky will come to a NATO summit if he comes to The Hague, if he's invited, if there is no vocal opposition to his presence. So it won't be a big surprise. It's another matter what NATO will say, what kind of decisions, if any, will be taken by NATO during the summit with regard to Ukraine, or whether it's going to be, the standard sort of statement of support. I think this is what interests the Russians, the fact that Zelensky will come to the summit. I don't think they'll be particularly surprised with that.
And looking at Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's invitation for talks in Istanbul next week, again, how serious do you think the Russians are about peace this time? Will we see any movement?
No, I don't think they're serious about peace. They're serious about showing that they are serious about peace. So this is quite a big difference. They want to drag on the conversations in order to show the US that they're intent on some kind of result, so that the US will not clamp massive sanctions on them. They still want to have Donald Trump believe that eventually he's going to influence Vladimir Putin, but I don't think they're going to talk about real substantive issues in any earnestness, in any seriousness, because we've also heard from Lavrov, I think it was yesterday, when he said, or this morning, yes, we're coming to Istanbul, and then he rolled out the same list of demands that they had since 2022. So I don't think they're serious about political or diplomatic real comprehensive solution, but what could come out of it is probably more prisoner exchanges, more exchanges of probably civilians. We'll see some kind of, if you wish, diplomatic lubricant to this process, so it won't look as a failed one.
Konstantin, thank you as always. That's Konstantin Eggert.